Davies. Good evening, good afternoon, everybody. Wherever you're joining us from, I trust that you're keeping safe. We have a few people still joining us, but we'll start with introductions so long. I'd like to welcome you all to this exciting series of webinars on asset management practices in asset-intensive industries, co-hosted by the South African Institute of Electrical Engineers and SAIEE. I am Prince Moyo, and I'm employed at Eskom as General Manager for Transmission Engineering. I also fulfill some volunteer roles at SAIEE and SAIEE. I'll be your moderator today. We have 7 webinars lined up every week from today with various speakers covering a range of topics from the general asset management to sample artifacts and special topics on the application of asset management principles in industry. We'll cover the 4 common asset planning aspects of planning for growth through expansion and managing risk through maintenance, refurbishment, and operations planning. We will wrap up at the end with a talk on the optimization of project portfolios that result from all this planning in the light of capital rationing. So make sure to join us every week. You can submit your questions during the session via the questions pane. I will try and table as many of your questions as possible to the presenters after they conclude. And just a heads up that our presenters are in Cape Town and the UK. So we will be doing some handover during the presentations, and please bear with us. Today's session is titled ISO 55000, a general overview, and is presented by 2 of the most esteemed asset management practitioners in the world, Grahame Fogel of Tetra Pak and Rhys Davies of Atkins in the UK. I will go through their bios, which you have on your screen very briefly. Grahame is an internationally recognized expert in asset management. He has over 35 years experience ranging from power generation through mining and pharmaceuticals. He has published widely in books and journals on asset management and is a prominent voice at conferences. His expert focus is on asset contribution management and how to unlock value within enterprises. He has worked on a global stage and demonstrated value in the most challenging of circumstances. He is a member of the IAM UK, SAMA, and a board member of the Association of Maintenance Professionals. He is also an endorsed IAM PES 55 assessor. Rhys Davies is the global consulting leader for asset management at Atkins. He supports business units across SMC level in group in delivering value for clients and developing their asset management capabilities. He is the chair of the ISO Permanent Committee, TC 251, leading 35 countries in developing international standards for asset management, including the ISO 55000 series. He is a fellow of the Institute of Asset Management, as well as a registered asset management professional. He has been involved in a variety of roles, including IAM board and council previous to that. He is currently the Atkins representative in the UK Patrons Group. I'm sure you'll agree that we have an esteemed series, and I'm going to now hand over the presentation to Grahame to kick us off. Over to you, Grahame.
Okay. Right, I'm assuming everybody can see my screen. Good evening to fellow inmates in South Africa. I can imagine you all in your homes at early evening. Hopefully some of you have got a glass of wine next to you. Those who planned ahead and still got wine within your stocks. I'm going to talk briefly about asset management, and the focus of my discussion this evening is to give a strategic overview of how this contributes value at the highest level within asset management organizations. The first thing I wanted to do, just get ourselves on the same page with the same vocabulary. Just wanted to check people can see my screen. Can somebody give me an indication?
Yeah, I can see it, Grahame.
Okay. The first thing is what we have to get is a normative reference. What is an asset? And an asset is anything from which an organization derives value. Up until a couple of years ago, assets were physical things. There were pumps and there were motors and there were transmission lines. But an organizational culture and a aligned set of competencies and management support are just as much assets as the physical assets that we see within plants and manufacturing organizations. And then we get on to this idea of asset management around which we're talking about this evening. And asset management, as per the fairly dry ISO 55000 definition, is the coordinated activity of an organization to realize value from its assets. It's aimed to be a strategic activity. It's very much differentiated from maintenance, which is a repair and restoration tactical activity. But asset management is there to give a context of why organizations invest in assets. Assets are there to provide value and strategic outcomes. So we then get on to what is an asset management system, because this ISO 55000 standard that we're all talking about is that of an asset management system. How do you implement, define, and conceptualize what an asset management system is? And again, the fairly dry definition from ISO 55000 is a set of interrelated or interacting elements of an organization to achieve asset management policy, objective, and processes to achieve these objectives. Those are fairly dry definitions, and I'll try and illustrate what they mean fairly practically. So here we are. Here's my first picture, and what it is it tries to illustrate the difference between a tactical and a strategic approach. And you can see these two guys sitting around and investing their time, and the question is, who's going to derive most value out of their investment? And essentially, what asset management is all about is taking a strategic view of the ownership and the investment of assets and how it can drive outcomes at the highest level within the organization. So let's get on to looking at what a management system is and asking the question of whether you need one. So this diagram over here illustrates what a management system is. We're talking about an asset management system. There's other kinds of management systems, such as a risk management system, and I'm sure most people are familiar with a quality management system. And the question that one asks is, does one need one? And if one doesn't need one, don't go and invest in it, because it's going to take time, effort, resources. But if one does need one, one has to clearly identify the strategic need for that asset management system and what it's going to deliver in terms of the value attributes. And I put a couple up there: faster, cheaper, improved, those kinds of illustrative words identify a strategic needs. And if you have that strategic need, then you go and look at the as-is situation. Where are you in regards to what the strategic need may be? And if there's a gap, one develops a strategic loop where you identify who needs those strategic outcomes. How do you set the standards of performance? You put an execution plan together, and then you set a operational loop, which is a set of interventions, and then you have ongoing engagement with the stakeholder, and then you just go around in those dualistic loops over there to make sure that you're achieving your strategic outcome over there. And this is essentially a small illustration of what a management system does. Now, conceptualizing the asset management context of a management system, it looks something like this. All organizations have stakeholders of some variety. Some are shareholders, some are users, some are the general public, as we are with the utilities that we rely on in this country. And then an organization has business objectives, the highest strategic objectives within the organization, which cascades down to the establishment of what the policy should be for the organization in terms of managing those assets. And there's a number of artifacts then that ISO 55000 refers to. And the first is called the SAMP, or the Strategic Asset Management Plan. That's how you're going to achieve the outcomes that you desire to get. The gap analysis is where you are today in regards with what you're trying to achieve. And there's a whole set of different artifacts, such as AMPs and processes that support this. But in essence, very simply, this is what an asset management system looks like. And this is what the ISO 55000 standard is conceptualized to drive. Now, what I've done here is taken a real life example of how one aligns organizational objectives to asset management objectives. And that's an absolutely key alignment, because asset management is trying to drive strategic objectives. How do we get what the organization is trying to achieve? And as we've all been shaken up in the last 4 or 5 months with the changes in the world, those organizational objectives in many organizations are going to change, and assets are going to have to be reconsidered in terms of the context that they have to provide to achieve new organizational objectives. But this is the kind of alignment that occurs when you start setting up an asset management system where you cascade and align the organizational objectives to asset management objectives. In essence, and I'm not going to go into detail because I'm sure Rhys is going to do that, is ISO 55000 consists of a suite of standards where 55000 gives you an overview of principles and terminology. The 55001 is the actual system requirement for 55000, and 55002 is a guideline of how do you implement 55001. It's written in very dry language. Some people find it inaccessible, but it's enormously useful. I've been on the forefront of actually applying it in the last 4, 5, 6 years across the world in a number of different industries. And I can say from real experience that there is the combined wisdom of the best thinking of the most experienced people in asset management, which is contained within this dry document. So it is really a very useful and not easily referenced, but referenceable set of guidelines of how to get yourself getting the most out of the investment in assets within your organization. So conceptually, a couple of years ago, I put this diagram together to try and give a simple illustration of what this whole 55,000 is all about. And what we have over there, represented by the balls over there, is a whole bunch of initiatives which exist in every single organization. And what 55,000 tries to do is to align those initiatives within a structured context to get you to a place where you are qualified. That's ISO 55,000 endorsed, enabled if you go for qualification, to give you the kind of DNA within your organization to address the challenges of the future. And that's the kind of simplistic ISO 55,000 journey in a simple diagram over there. Now, having been through this journey with a number of organizations over the last couple of years, I wanted to put this little bit of an alert to people. As soon as people start talking about a standard, one starts thinking about, well, am I going to be audited? Am I going to meet that standard, etc.? And one goes into a conformance mindset. And a conformance mindset has a number of elements to it, and it is a constrained set of thinking, whereas the idea behind ISO 55,000 is to improve things, to create new value, to unlock new opportunities within an organization. And one of the things that one has to do in implementing an ISO 55,000 approach is to balance conformance with performance. Conformance is necessary to manage risk, but performance is the only thing that your organization is going to invest in, especially in the new world that we live in. So you have to be able to balance those two, but ensure that there are real tangible deliverables that come out of that investment in establishing an asset management system. Now, in our approach to 55,000, we conceptualized an execution diagram that looks something like this, and we've written it up. The reference is over there if anybody wants to have a look at it. And we said there are 3 key elements in establishing a performance-related asset management system. There's a foundational element that you have to have in place. That's your information systems, your asset configuration, your stores, your basic ability to produce whatever it is you're producing or manufacturing. And then there's the delivery focus, which is at the middle level over there. How do you ensure the reliability, the performance, the risk management, the technology enablement, the information capabilities, those kinds of things that you need to become a good producer. And at the top, how do you ensure that you're aligning to stakeholder expectations and the overall organizational strategic plan over there? And our interpretation of ISO 55,000 is conceptualized in this diagram over here, and we've implemented this in a number of organizations and across a number of industries in a number of geographies around the world. So it has a number of outcomes. We believe it provides a long-term strategic view. It provides a clear definition of what constitutes value. It aligns the organization and gives you another set of really clear provisions from adopting a systematic approach. And I'm not going to go through this because Rhys, I know, is going to go through this very, very detailed. and I'm going to just jump into this one. Value, this is a definition of value from an asset management investment. Your value levers are either operational, where you're going to be increasing profits, or you're going to be using capital more productively into the future. So there's two value levers. There's the operational, which is the present, there's the as is, and how you're going to be addressing the future. And asset management aligns and takes into consideration both the operational excellence and the capital productivity over the whole life cycle of the asset. And then there are numbers of dimensions to value that asset management contributes. Very importantly is the financial argument, the improved cost structures, the improved outputs, those kind of dimensions of value over there. But there's other aspects of value that asset management looks at. There's having a long-term strategic view. There's being a better risk manager. There's better governance and compliant. Values are addressed within asset management. Values being you are going to be a better custodian for the planet's resources, for example, or you're not going to harm people. Asset management has an absolutely clear role to contribute to those kind of values, and then competence at the bottom over here. So if everyone has to go and explain where the context of asset management is in terms of value, this is a good diagram, and I'm sure, Prince, you will be distributing these presentations to anybody who wants. I will let you have my presentation so you can use these within your organization if you need to in the future. Now, to end off, I asked the question, is your organization ready for asset management? And the way that I've articulated this is just going through a comparison with Maslow's hierarchy of self-actualization for the individual. If you are just looking for physiological needs and your safety needs as an individual, you're not going to achieve a higher level of self-actualization because you are just going to be dealing with your day-to-day, getting through the day, feeding your family, paying off your debts, living from a hand-to-mouth existence. And I think the same applies to organizations. If organizations are struggling for their basic financial viability, and if they are very low in the capabilities, they should not be looking at ISO 55,000 to transport them to a new level of capability. But if you're an organization that's stable, you're aspirational, you want to get better, you want to release new areas of value, you see yourself being a fairly mature organization wanting to mature to high levels of aspiration, then ISO 55,000 is definitely a vehicle that you should be considering to take you towards that new level of structure, that new level of sustainability of performance of assets. And just to end my presentation, I put a slide together to end off. This is from the utilities industry, and it's from organizations that have implemented ISO 55,000. And this is the kind of benefits, value experience that they are experiencing from their investment over there, with a whole bunch of varied value contributions, from reduced cost to higher performance, to reduced cost of loan finance, to reduction in insurance costs. So the report back that practitioners are saying they're getting is significant and a differentiator within the utilities marketplace. And that's the end of my presentation. I'm going to stay online so I can take questions after Rhys. And Rhys, I'm going to hand on to you now.
Hey, thank you very much, Grahame.
There, that should be handing over to you.
Screen. Okay, if you can let me know, Grahame, when you can see my screen, but I think I'm sharing it.
Yes, I can see your screen. You're
Perfect.
fully
Thank you very
visible.
much. Thank you very much for that great presentation as well, Grahame. So hopefully I'm going to build on that, build on Grahame's view of management systems. And I think one of the things that I was keen to do was to explain to you where did the 55,000 series come from, who developed it, why it should be important to you, but also highlight opportunities for you guys to get involved and mechanisms for doing that. So we'll do that. So as Prince kindly said, I'm the chair of ISO TC251. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. And I also work for the Atkins company, which is a global civil engineering consultancy, now owned by the Canadian SNC Lavalin. And I lead all of our asset management consultancy globally across all of that group. And much like Grahame, I've got a history working in lots of different sectors, from aerospace, defense, lots of rail, little bits of telecoms, power and oil and gas. And thank you also, Prince, for my introduction. He covered all of my work in IM board members and patrons and council. And I think the key thing today is that I'm predominantly speaking as the chair of TC251, which is the committee that writes the 55,000 series of standards. So this next slide reiterates something that Grahame highlighted. I like to just contextualize asset management, because there's lots of people talk about it and make it very complicated. And I noticed that Grahame had a very similar message in his, which is great. But for me, 4 of the big themes are aligned objectives, getting everything aligned from the very strategic level all the way down to the tactical level. But that alignment is important, that it's not just up and down the organization, but side to side across the organization as well. So that if you are dealing with a complex industry like power utilities or power generation, you are able to align objectives between steam generation and transforming and power distribution, and having the ability to develop a common language that makes sure you have objectives aligned across those different asset groupings, but also up and down the organization, from the strategic down to everybody turning a spanner on their equipment. I think the second important element there is having transparent and consistent rules for decision making. I think one of the things we've all seen in organizations is that you often don't know what the rules of the game are. How do you get your initiative approved? And lots of the things Grahame was talking about are 100% correct and true in there, which is laying out those rules by which an organization is going to make decisions, so that everybody knows what they are. Everybody knows how to submit a budget request for their initiative or their capital investment or their change in maintenance policy. And we have a transparent mechanism for choosing between them, because whenever I speak to senior management teams, the one problem they highlight all the time is that they know that they have lots of really great people in different disciplines in their organization. They know that they're all really passionate about their discipline. But if I've got a turbine engineer talking to me about issues in steam generation turbines, and he sounds very passionate and wants money, and conversely, I've got the transformer engineer talking to me about dissolved gas analysis, as a senior manager, I need a mechanism for differentiating between those. And this is where we start to get in the context of clear decision-making rules, consistently applied, and therefore captured in a management system approach, which is what Grahame started to introduce. And I think that's that transparent and consistent decision-making and a common language that enables all of us technical experts to talk to senior management team and the financiers using a common language is very important. Number 3 is long-term strategic view. For me, this is massive. It's a huge element of an asset management approach. It's a huge element of ISO 55,000. Taking the view, the strategizing, the planning of the organization out beyond a typical business planning cycle. I think we see regularly that organizations have good planning within a business planning cycle, but that might only be annually, maybe 3 years, 5 years for some of the regulated industries. I see some organizations in UK industries now going out to 7 years for some of their business planning. But if you're dealing with an asset life cycle of 25, 30, sometimes even 50 or 60 years for civil structures, planning in a 5-year period doesn't work for those. So asset management and ISO 55000 is a big part of that, is taking that long-term strategic view. And the final one of my 4 things, which I know Grahame mentioned several times as well, and just to reiterate it, is risk-based decision-making from a position of knowledge. There's lots of things bundled into that last one. Firstly, position of knowledge, using the information you have available to you, coming back from your assets. Okay. Secondly, transparent and consistent decision-making, but a clear linkage into organizational risk. And I'll come back and touch on that again in a minute. So if you remember nothing else from this webinar, remember these 4 things. These are the core of asset management. And just in case there's any senior managers in here who find 4 things too difficult, I'll reduce it to a single thing. And I steal this quote from the former chairman of the New York Metropolitan Transit Authority. I spent an afternoon talking to him a long time ago about asset management. And at the end of that session, he said, so basically, this is all about how I choose where to spend the MTA's last $1,000 to deliver best value. And I still use that quote with lots of clients and training courses, because it's a really good extreme example of what asset management is. If you only have $1,000 left, 1,000 rand left, 1,000 euros, pounds, yen, whatever, where would you spend that to get your best value? And if you have clear objectives, if you have transparent and consistent decision-making rules, and you're taking a long-term strategic view, you will know the answer to that question. So really important thing. 4 things to remember today. If 4's too many, go with 1, which is, where do you spend your last $1,000? So one of the things that I get asked all the time is, why is asset management different? We've been managing assets for a long time. We know about maintenance, and that's 100% correct. The reliability engineering, the mathematics, the understanding of asset-related risk associated with managing assets has existed for a long time, and it hasn't changed. And within the 55,000 series, at no point are we saying that all of that good reliability engineering, systems engineering, cost optimization approaches is wrong. It's all correct. But what we want people to think about is to step up a level, take a more helicopter view, take a longer term view, and stop thinking about managing individual assets and start thinking about asset management. So way back in 2002, when we started writing the forerunner to 55,000, and then again in 2010, when we started writing ISO 55,000, we took a very conscious decision that we would write them as management systems standards. So we are not trying to replace all of the good reliability engineering, maintainability engineering, systems engineering. They are all good, and they should form part of your asset management solution. But what we did need to do, and the thing we think was absent from all of that great engineering and mathematics and systems engineering approaches, was bring our good technical thinking into the business world. So 55,000 provides greater linkages into organizational objectives, a greater understanding of how asset risk, which as engineers we all understand really well, but what we're really poor at doing is translating that asset risk into an enterprise level risk that the senior management team, that the finance people and the accountants can understand. More importantly, if we're able to translate asset risk into enterprise risk, then I have a common language that enables my generating turbine technical problem in terms of generating turbine risk with my transformer risk problem. I'm able to compare them using enterprise risk in exactly the things Grahame was talking about, which is what does that mean for my power network customers in terms of lost customer hours, SAIEE kind of measures, all of those things that are important to the end user. I need to be able to convert my technical risk into an enterprise risk, because that's what really matters. I think one of the things that I've seen, I know from working with Grahame in the past that he's seen it as well, it's just, if you are able to express these things in a common language, you have a much better argument in the senior management room, in the boardroom, for when you're allocating budget. And the last bullet on there is a greater understanding of how business planning cycles sit within long-term asset life cycles. And I spoke about that previously on one of the previous slides, but it's a real issue for us. Historically, we know that we have to think over the entire asset life cycle, but most organizations plan their business on a business planning cycle which is much shorter. And that is one of the key reasons why ISO 55000 requires that long-term thinking, that long-term strategic view that you capture in the form of the strategic asset management plan that Grahame spoke about. So Grahame had a similar picture to this. So these are the clauses of ISO 55000, and you will be pleased to know that I'm not going to talk to them. As Grahame quite correctly highlighted, it's a dry read. It's not the most exciting thing you want to pick up and read every day, but there are some really powerful messages in there. And what I want to try and get across in this presentation are those big messages, the issues around those four big things of aligned objectives: transparent decision making, long-term strategic view, and risk-based decision making as well. And the thing I do want to talk about it's the same list of clauses that Grahame had on his slide, but what I've done is put it onto a classic plan, do, check, act cycle. So if you look at the items at the top around clauses 5 under leadership and planning, we've got those big elements of planning, deciding what we are going to do with our organization. Then we get round into the bottom right-hand corner of operations, where we've got a number of clauses that talk about how we control the delivery of those plans. How do we control the delivery of building new assets? How do we control the delivery of maintaining new assets? How do we control the delivery of removing life-expired assets? Then we move around to the bottom left-hand corner of performance evaluation, monitoring and measuring what we're doing. So we've set a number of objectives in the planning phase. Now we need to measure what we are actually achieving in terms of asset condition, asset performance. But it's not just asset-related measures, it's measures about how well our control processes work, how well our risk management framework is working. Internal audit is a mechanism for measuring how well our management system is working as a whole, feeding that all back into the improvement activities under clause 10. So dealing with things when they don't happen the way we expect them to in our plans. And that's not just a case of we had incidents and accidents. Sure, they're part of that improvement, but also we set out to achieve a specific measure of performance, a specific measure of asset condition. And if we didn't achieve that level of performance or condition, then we need to think about what we need to do in terms of changing the objectives, changing the way we build equipment, changing the way we maintain them. And you get this nice plan, do, check, act cycle. One box I haven't spoken about is the box in the middle, the support. And these are all very, very important. So resources, competence, communicating both internally and externally. And then 7.5, one of the big games in town at the moment, which is information requirements, which as we speak is becoming more and more digital. How do we deal with remote condition monitoring systems and the vast data lakes they generate? And therefore we need to start thinking about data analytics and other approaches to process that information, but ultimately to help inform our decision making. So I'm not going to talk in huge detail about all of those clauses, but I think that plan, do, check, act cycle is hugely important. That support area in the middle about having competent people, competent resource, and good information systems to inform that decision making from a position of knowledge is hugely important. I've got one more thing I want to say to this slide, which is for those of you who are maybe not familiar with ISO 55000, but are familiar with the other management system standards like ISO 9000 for quality management or ISO 14000 for environmental management, you will recognize this structure, and that is by design. ISO for a number of years now has been encouraging management systems to adopt the same approach, adopt the same structure, and in many areas adopt the same language and text in some of the clauses. So if you go and look in the requirements for internal audit, for example, in all of those standards, you will find a lot of common language. And the reason for that is it means it's very easy for you to implement in your organization, because you're not conflicting with the quality manager or the environmental manager or the health and safety manager. So this slide's a very short one, benefits of management systems. I think we've talked already about the fact that we have good systems engineering, we have good reliability engineering, we have good maintainability engineering. And a management systems approach gives all of those things a home. It helps organizations to become more consistent, particularly in those industries where you see high levels of staff turnover. I think that's a particularly important area. I know certainly in Europe we see lots of staff turnover, and a management system is a good way to capture the way the organization does things so that you can carry on not reinventing the need to redefine safety engineering or reliability engineering or system engineering concepts each time. They should already be embedded in the process so that in a few years' time we should still be remembering that we need to do that. But bear in mind, and this is a big criticism of management systems, people often say they become too bureaucratic. And I think where they have been implemented badly, yes, they become bureaucratic. But if you actually speak to the other committees who write these standards, you will hear a very strong message that best practice management systems should be agile and adapt to change regularly, but keep that corporate memory of how to do things. So why is this all important to you? And I think what I want to highlight in these few slides here is a little bit about the TC251 committee, so that you understand that ISO 55000 wasn't written by Rhys and Grahame and a couple of our friends one weekend. It was a process to generate a global consensus among 35 countries. Okay, so ISO is a worldwide network of the main standardization bodies. SABS in South Africa is a member of ISO, so it's one of those 163 countries. And ISO develops and publishes international standards, bringing together experts from all over the world. And those experts come from a lot of different backgrounds. Okay, there's 22,000 international standards and related publications. They're all voluntary, they're all consensus based. They cover things like product compatibility, product and service safety, and management systems. And this is where TC251 works. We are one of the 779 technical committees, and we manage the ISO 55000 series of standards. And our remit is to create international standards in the field of asset management. Okay, I talked about 35 countries participating, which doesn't sound like a huge number of countries, but if you look at all of those blue areas on this map, that is the 35 countries, and it pretty easily covers a lot of the developed, industrialized parts of the world. So all of Europe is in there, all of North America, Brazil, Argentina, Chile, Ecuador, all in, and Colombia involved in Latin America, Australia, Russia, China, India, and of course South Africa is standing out at the bottom of the continent of Africa, and was a very active participant in the development of the original standards via SABS. I also like to recall that it was one of our nicest meetings as well. We had a very good meeting in Pretoria where we drank a lot of South African wine and ate a lot of South African steak, so it's very good. But which is all very interesting, but what's important about this is that you should take away the message that ISO 55000 series of standard was developed by pretty much the global engineering and asset management community. If I look across UK, Netherlands, South Africa, Australia, and North America. I've probably got some of the world's greatest asset management experts, and they all come to TC251 and provide input. So when you pick up and read those very dry documents, you are getting the benefit of all of that input from around the world. Okay. As Grahame mentioned, in 2014, we published the 3 first standards. So 55,000 is the overview and terminology. 55,001 is the actual requirements, and 55,002 is a set of guidelines for applying the requirements. Now, immediately after publishing those 3 documents, one of the things we set out to do was to start to gather feedback from users of those 3 documents with a view to, in a very short period of time, republishing a revised version of the guidelines. So in 2018, you see a new version of 55,002, the guidelines, and that drew in input from all of those countries about what people had understood well, what people hadn't understood well, and we wrote a much more comprehensive set of guidelines. So if you're still reading the 2014 set of 55,002, I would strongly recommend getting hold of a copy of the 2018 set of guidelines. It's about 3 times the size of the document. It covers in a lot more detail the individual requirements, but it also provides a series of annexes which deal with subjects that cross all of the requirements in 55,000. So there's an annex on risk, there's an annex on risk-based decision making, there's an annex on value, there's an annex specifically on writing a strategic asset management plan, and these all help organizations implement it. Management systems are not the only thing we do. We have a working group which specifically looks at finance, and in 2019 we published a technical specification, ISO 55010, which provides guidance on aligning asset management, finance, and accounting. And for those of you who've tried to deal with things like your enterprise asset management system and balance it with the financial asset register in your organization, you'll notice that quite often these are different things, and we've produced a specific document providing guidance on that as well. We have a publicly available website. The web address is in the top left-hand corner of this slide, where there are lots of free materials. So we have a number of pages on there. We have some articles available which are free to download. We have reference materials which explain a bit more about 55,001, 55,002. And we also have lots of other information, things like we have a list of known certified organizations, because actually that's quite a difficult thing to get hold of. We have a series of case studies, but we're always open to more case studies, and particularly some from Africa would be really nice. So it's worth having a look at our website. It's an opportunity for you to get all of information that won't cost you anything. There's lots of short stuff. And I would very much recommend doing that. This is our current structure, TC251's current structure. So again, I mentioned we're tasked with providing standardization in the field of asset management. We have 2 ad hoc groups. One of them always exists for Spanish translations. That sounds strange, but there's lots of countries speak Spanish, so they have to coordinate themselves for translations. We currently have a temporary ad hoc group on decision making, which is a particularly important area of asset management, particularly in a world where we're seeing a lot more decision making. So understanding how we deal with data analytics and data lakes is a huge part. I have a chairman's advisory group, which is attended by every country who's a participating member sends a delegate. And then we have working groups for communications, who are on the website, a product improvement group which gathers feedback from around the world and is also preparing at the moment for a revision of the ISO 55,000 standard, which will probably start that work next year, and that will take 2 to 3 years to complete. We have a working group specifically for finance because it's such an important area. Our working group 6 is currently preparing for the revision of ISO 55,001, which, remember, is the core requirements documentation. And we also have working group 7, which is working on standards and articles in the areas of public policy making. And that's particularly important because we recognize that the world's largest asset owners, and therefore the world's largest asset managers, tend to be governments and public bodies, whether they're municipal, regional, provincial, or national. They are the world's biggest asset owners and therefore biggest asset managers. So we've got a working group devoted to understanding how we do that. Some of the things we're currently working on, I mentioned earlier that there is a common structure for all management system standards and some common language. I have the joy of engaging in that committee where we deal with the high-level structure and the common language between all management system standards, and that's important because it makes sure that 55,000 is easily implementable in organizations where you might already have 9,000 or 14,000 per environment. We're working on guidance for public policy in asset management, as I've mentioned. We're working on exploring decision-making process with a view to developing new standards, and we're exploring finance and how asset management impacts areas like financial decision-making. And one of the spin-offs from that is that we're currently supporting standards development in sustainable finance. One of Grahame's points, I think, was about sustainability and environmental sustainability. There is a separate technical committee on sustainable finance, which looks at green investments, and we're very heavily involved in helping them develop their standards documentation and guidance documentation so that asset management becomes a core part of thinking for the investment community. And I've already mentioned we're preparing for revisions of 55,000 and 55,001, but don't panic. If you're at the beginning of your implementation journey, we've probably got 3 or 4 years before you see a new version. So start work now, and we'll catch up with you when we bring out the new revisions. People often ask me about uptake. It's very difficult. We're a relatively new standard in a new discipline for the ISO world. But one thing I can say is we have already been translated into, I think it's actually more like 13 or 14 languages now. And if you look at these between English, French, Russian, Chinese, and Spanish, that covers a large proportion of the globe. And these translations happen really quickly. So we got into translated into a lot of languages very quickly, and that's as a result of demand. We don't push that, but that happens because countries sit there and say, we need this to be available in Swedish, we need this to be available in Finnish or Spanish or Dutch, and I find that hugely interesting. What's also interesting and why it's a big driver is that the biggest selling version of ISO 55,000 is the version in Mandarin Chinese. They have sold more copies than every other language in the world put together. And I know it because I've been to speak in China on numerous occasions now, that the Chinese Ministry of Finance approves ISO 55,000 as a good thing for Chinese asset owners to adopt. That's a hugely important thing. And in a global world where we all are seeking to trade with China or buy things from China, knowing that they understand ISO 55,000 is hugely important. So I know you're all keen to contribute. So the way you need to contribute is to contact SABS. And there is a national mirror committee. So there is a South African specific committee, the same as there are in the UK. There is a UK committee, and they send probably 4 or 5 people to the international meetings. Same with South Africa, same with the US, same with China. So if you contact SABS, you should be able to get in touch with that, and I'm sure Grahame can help connect you in SABS. I don't have a contact detail there, but I'm sure between me and Grahame we can do if anybody's interested. And the other thing I'd like to highlight is there are ways to contribute to our website. This email address, submissions@iso55000.org, goes straight to my communications working group lead who owns the website, and they are always looking for case studies, reference material, and announcements of ISO 55001 certification, because strangely there is no central register of where these are. So one of the things that we put on our website, you can see it in the bottom right hand corner, the link there is a list of known certified organizations, which I now can't find. There we go. So there's a big long list of non-certified organizations on there, which is very useful to you if you're interested in seeing what's going on. Although you will notice that when I scroll down to Africa, the list is quite short, and a lot of those are Middle Eastern countries. So lots more activity needed in not just Southern Africa, but all of Africa generally. That's the end of my presentation. Thank you very much for your time, and we've got some time for questions, which is good. So I'm going to hand back to Prince, who's going to coordinate the questions. Prince, you should have control back.
Thank you, Rhys. I do have, and I trust you can see my screen. We are
yes,
on
I can.
to the
we can see your screen now. Yep.
Thank you. We are on to questions, and I am quite surprised. It sounds like you guys probably planted your questions amongst the audience, because you have answered them, some of them, most of them, in your presentation. So Pascal, you were asking us how to participate. And Pascal, I'm sure you saw the slide towards the end there, and you saw a private response also, that it's via the MIRA committee of your national association that is taking part in the ISO TC. In this case, it's SABS. So participate in the SABS MIRA committee, and you might just be selected as South African representative at ISO. So that's answered. Another question that we
Prince,
got.
can I just interrupt on that as well for a second? So I know that a lot of people are concerned that they're not able to travel internationally. But what I would highlight is that in pretty much every country that participates, the vast majority of people don't travel internationally. They have local meetings where they discuss the documents, they contribute. We do a lot of work electronically. So don't be concerned about the fact that you don't think your employer will give you the ability to travel internationally, or you can't afford to travel internationally. A lot of the work all happens in individual countries, and it gets fed in electronically. So don't worry about the international element. Feel free. If you engage with SABS, your input will make it to the international meeting via a variety of routes.
Wonderful. That was Pascal Motsuasele from Rand Water. We also had a question from Lungis Sibia of eThekwini. He wanted to know that earlier on, Grahame mentioned the benefits of the management system and mentioned that some utilities have experienced some success, and he wanted to know if any names could be shared so that he could engage with them. And towards the end there, Rhys, you've done exactly that. You've given us the link to a site of the TC where we can study that at our own leisure, but you have also shown the list here. So I don't know if you have anything else to add.
No, I think that covers it. I mean, I think I did a quick count before this call. If we look at all utilities, so electricity, gas, water, wastewater, on that list globally, there are somewhere between 125 and 150 organizations. Approximately 40% of those are electricity sector. Another 40% is water, wastewater, and 20% is gas distribution. So there's quite a lot in there. You will also notice when you go onto that website and look at that list that I think all of the items listed on there have a hyperlink to the press release or the announcement from the company, so you would be able to get hold of a specific contact person in each of those organizations if you wanted to.
Wonderful. I have a question from Mike Barker, and Grahame, you may want to take this one. He says, how does integrated use of management systems tie in with ISO 55000? Let me just make sure I'm representing his question right again. Yes, it's integrated use of management systems, shortened to IUMS. How does it tie into 55,001?
Do you want me to take that? I can do, or Grahame, do you want to take it?
Go for it, Rhys.
Yeah, I'll go for it. So one of the things I mentioned in my presentation is all of those management systems standards are built around the same high-level structure, and in many cases have common text for some of the clauses. There is an ISO publication, which is what I think the question is asking about, which is the Integrated Usage of Management Systems, IUMS handbook, which I certainly had sight of before it was published. Yeah, I mean, all of the management system standards are positive about integrated management systems. Certainly in my work with clients, I recommend to all of my clients that they don't have a quality management system, they don't have an asset management system, they don't have an environmental management system. What I recommend is that they have, if we're talking about ESCOM, they should have an ESCOM management system which draws on the requirements in 9,000, in 14,000, in 55,000 to give them the best practices that they then implement into ESCOM's integrated management system as an example. So yeah, none of these standards force you to have separate management systems. They should all be integrated, and it's definitely the way forward. The standards are consistent with each other. There's no conflict between them. And from memory, the IUMS handbook, which I think is what you're referring to, is quite a good guide to how you do that. There is also a British Standards Institute standard called BSI PAS 99, which is quite a good guideline document on how to build an integrated management systems.
Good. I'm going to take another couple of questions before we wrap up. Ncedile Bigashe has an interesting question for the presenters. She says, how can ISO 55,000 be made as famous as 9,000 and 14,000? Grahame, are you there? You might want to take this one as well, Rhys.
Yeah, I can do that. I would love to know the answer to that. Ultimately, it's down to people adopting it and using it. So I think the rate at which we've been translated is a big thing, and that's been very helpful in getting 55,000 adopted in various parts of the world and in various industries. I think if we look at the history of, for example, ISO 9000 as an example, one of the things that really drove ISO 9000 to huge popularity was governments mandating ISO 9000 in its supply chain. And once we see the big asset owners starting to be mandated by their investors or by the governments, then we will see it get adopted very widely. And that's one of the reasons why in TC251, we're engaging strongly with the sustainable finance community, because that means we're engaging with the investors of future infrastructure and encouraging them to mandate 55,000 based approaches in the projects they're investing in. And it's also the reason why we have a whole working group devoted to public policy. Because if you start to see, let's take defense as an example. In the US Air Force now mandates 55,000 asset management approaches in all of their facilities. So that's airfields, warehouses, hospitals, sites all around the world. That's a huge commitment. And when you start to see the commitment coming out of government mandating 55,000 based approaches, and we see the investment community mandating 55,000 based approaches, then it becomes the de facto language that everybody adopts and uses.
Wonderful.
Grahame, I was just muted. I just wanted to get back to the previous question. about integrated management systems. As a practical implementer, I found there's two natural allies within an organization. Most organizations have signed some kind of risk department or risk activity or risk division within the organization. And we actively go and find those risk people who are managing the enterprise risk and get them to understand the asset performance risk and align the asset performance risk with the enterprise risk. We also go and talk to the quality people, which we find sometimes are allies within the organization, or sometimes they just don't understand what asset management is all about. But we are finding a natural ally also within the financial community with an organization where they are trying to become IRF compliant. They're also interested in the kind of benefits, accountable benefits that the investments, future investments can be making. So we find that those communities working together, working towards some kind of integration of activities are natural allies. Then going back to, let's say, popularizing the formalistic asset management approach, I've noticed in worldwide bids for the new renewables bids, both in Southern Africa and other parts of the world, ISO 55,000 compliance is part of the fundamental language of being able to compete. So it is entering into the natural vocabulary. In the UK, I don't know if you know this, Rhys, all the new bids for wind energy, for example, and for solar sites, ISO 55,000 is in the requirements language.
Thank you, Grahame, for your expanding on these topics. I do see the questions coming thick and fast. My good friend Marcel Araújo in Brazil, in Sao Paulo, I see your questions here. And Refilweb, I can see your questions, Butelezi. But what I'm going to suggest is that we answer these questions offline. We have just run over our contracted time. It's good questions, but we will answer them offline. Let me take this chance then, folks, to thank our presenters for taking the time out to engage us and preparing this content. And I thought, let me sneak this one in here and say, let me sensitize you that some publishers are offering titles for free now, all legal above board. And I encourage you to go and have a look at the John Wiley's and the Springers and so on. And look for asset management books in there. You might just get a pleasant surprise. What remains for me then is to ask you to join us next week as we present the second webinar in this series. At the same time, the title is Sample Artifacts and is presented once more by Grahame Fogel. We are now getting into a little bit of the detail of asset management. We started off with an overview, and over the coming 6 weeks, we are going to delve into different aspects of the detail of ISO 55,000 and its application. Thank you very much, and until then, goodbye.